Hey, you guys, I'm not sure how much you missed. um, I'm still figuring out this Mac thing. Um, the so the 1950s in artwork. um, I was talking about how the center of attention for it was a small fishing village, St. Ives. Um, the and a lot of things were starting to kind of trickle in. We had these artists, Patrick Heron, Peter Lanyon, Roger Hilton, William Scott, who were known as the St. Ives School. Um, they kind of were feeding off of things that were coming out of America, um, and started exploring with the more abstract pieces. Um, so a lot of times, though, the realistic style was very big in Britain. The They were talking a lot about new realism. It featured familiar domestic environments. Um, some people talked about um, the genre being described as the kitchen sink school. The very realistic things. Um, with Francis Bacon, he has a website that I will give you guys the link to. Writing that down so I remember to do it. Um, the He is he's one of our featured works. I will put a picture of the artwork that is mentioned in the textbook on a PowerPoint for you guys. Um, the three studies for figures at the base of the crucifixion. It depicts a crucifixion, but it's not necessarily the religious one. Um, he was Bacon. Francis Bacon was openly gay when it was socially unacceptable. Um, he almost reminds me a little bit of Andy Warhol. Um, we see as well Lucian Freud. Um, he is the grandson of Sigmund Freud, um, and he um, he did portraits, figure paintings, sometimes just people in his life. Um, some of his paintings are very ugly, very severe. I will put a few pictures of his up as well. Um, so one of my favorite types of artwork is pop art, and our textbook has a little thing here that says um, "Pop goes the easel," um, and you'll see I've got some little marks in my book, um, so you know what I'm going to speak about. Um, America was very influential for the British artists, and there were a lot of artists in a group called the Independent Group. Um, Richard Hamilton being one of them, um, and I have some links for him for his artwork as well. Um, he he was really the one that um, defined pop culture, pop art for a lot of people. I'll put the picture that they mentioned in the textbook for you guys in the PowerPoint. Um, just what is it that makes today's home so different, so appealing? That's the name of the artwork. Um, Hamilton had really defined um, pop art by 1957 as follows. He says, "Pop art is popular, designed for a mass audience, transient, short-term solution, expendable, easily forgotten, low cost, mass-produced, young, aimed at youth, witty, sexy, gimmicky, glamorous, big business." Um, and he went on to influence a lot of artists himself. Peter Blake. I love Peter Blake. Um, you guys will see some Peter Blake artwork in the PowerPoint that I will do for you guys. Joe Tilson, Richard Smith. A lot of people when the most popular thing they know from Peter Blake is Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the cover of that. Um, just fascinating to see. Um, so um, the other thing, the other Beatles album cover that's a very well known album cover is called the White Album, and it's just white. um, the So there were a lot of art. There was a lot of artwork showing up in advertising. Anthony Armstrong Jones, Patrick Litchfield, David Bailey, Terrence Donovan, um, Terry Duffy. Um, we then see the idea of pop art, but we then see op art, um, which is optical art. Um, the geometric stuff. We still see that today. Um, it's thinking about mobiles. Um, the best known British proponent of that was Bridget Riley. Um, so the pop artists had come to Britain, um, and our textbook kind of at this point mentions David Hockney. Um, the A lot of people really liked Hockney, and I will put some pieces of his on our PowerPoint that I do, um, and the fascinating thing for him is that a lot of his paintings were made to look like photographic images. Um, so he also would make art um, using the fax machine, doing photo collages, um, just the so he also established a gallery which has the largest collection of his work. Um, so he's really known for kind of mixing up his styles. Um, One thing that I tend to associate with British artwork as well is the idea of the sculpture. Um, it's During the 30s and the 40s, we see it mentions that Henry Moore um, was the main influence for that. That he had these very rounded, smooth things, but um, we see the in 1945 a type of sculpture called the Geometry of Fear appeared, and it was thinking about the horrors of war, and we see a lot of thin, angular, contorted expressions that suggest pain. Some of the proponents for that were Reg Butler and Lynn Chadwick. Um, then we see abstract sculptures coming in too. Anthony Caro welded steel shapes. He had been around, and his works. He was first making flat forms, and then he we see the new generation of sculpture, brightly colored. Then it develops into a style called heavy metal, and not that heavy metal. Cut, twisted, abstract shapes. He's known for Caro is known for using steel girders, and he was known as one of England's finest sculptors. So we kind of see a movement um, that's away from conceptual art of the 70s. Sorry for my phone ringing. I told y'all I'm at home. Uh, the I'll try to let it go past. Maybe not. um, I'm gonna keep talking because that thing may go. Just as I say, I'm gonna keep talking. It stops. So British sculpture, it develops in the 70s with neo expressionism. Kind of goes back to kind of goes back to the kind of goes back to the neo to the traditional, but then we see it kind of move away again. Um, it was we see um, just the very um, traditional stone and marble, but then we see movement that kind of goes away from that again. Um, that we see just a lot of the things that that kind of move away from that. The we so some of the names that we see there. We see Tony Cragg, Anthony Anthony Gormley, Richard Deacon, Anish Kapoor. Um, I'll put some pictures of those, but then there is one they speak about that's it's called Sky Mirror. That's it's a dish-like sculpture. Um, we see it's made from strips of stainless steel. Um, we see the we see one called Holocaust Memorial from 1995 that was created for a London synagogue. Um, it's just a rectangular stone block, um, and a doorway is carved out of one side, and um, an image of the viewer kind of hangs in the air. Um, so we just so another one that we another sculptor that's mentioned, um, Rachel Whiteread. Um, she her works have received some international recognition. Um, she would sculpt she would have pieces like plaster casts of bodies and personal mementos. Um, so a lot of her works kind of focused around bed. Um, so the she had several pieces like one called Shallow Breath, which is a cast of the space under the bed in which she was born, um, which she made, and she we see there was one called Ghost that was the cast of an inside of a living room. Um, House was a cast of the interior um, of a completed terrace house. Um, and one of the outstanding places in London, one of the places I really like to go is Trafalgar Square. Um, and it was designed to give um, scope and artistic character to sculptural work of high class. I'll show you a picture of that. Um, so a lot of people um, maybe are remembered there, like Horatio Nelson, um, and we see Rachel Whiteread has a sculpture in Trafalgar Square called Monument. Um, then there was one on one of the one of there was one there called um, by Mark Quinn called Alison Lapper Pregnant, um, a statue of a pregnant disabled artist. Um, so it's really kind of fascinating. I'll probably give you a link because I think Trafalgar Square has a website. Um, so it's really sort of fascinating to see a lot of that. Um, so the 70s, kind of back to the 70s for a minute. A lot of things were kind of fragmenting and changing. Um, there were there was conceptual art that was coming along, and so um, a lot of people they felt like the art world had gotten too commercialized, so uh, they were somewhat disillusioned to it. um, the So we see a lot of people were getting upset with the Tate Gallery at that point, and there were um, there were some weird things that were displayed there. Um, a pile of blankets, um, dirty nappies, dirty diapers. Um, the because they so um, we see there was a show by in 1976 by a group of artists known as the CUOM um, transmissions that kind of encompassed punk rock, which was going on at the time. Um, it included pornographic magazines that were mounted and displayed, a Venus de Milo with a tampon, a box of live maggots. Tabloid newspapers um, were talking about an attack on it. But it was punk. That was what happened. So the art of the 1980s, um, nothing really was kind of standing out. There were a lot of attempts in Scotland to develop the identity of Scottish art, um, and we see one of the most important Scottish artists was Eduardo um, Paolizzi. Um, he worked mainly in London, but um, he would have these very small works in bronze and wood. Um, he later became sculptor to the Queen in Scotland, um, and he one of his well-known things is the giant figure of Isaac Newton contemplating the universe outside the new British Library building. Um, I remember back in the day when the British Library was kind of housed in the British Museum. So I'm very glad they've got a building of their own. Um, so he was so um, Paolizzi was known for very dense collages, um, and he has work that's on display in the on the walls of the Tottenham Court Road Underground um, in central London. Um, and I remember that. I remember that station as being one of my favorites because um, it was so interesting to look at. One of the things that I remember seeing in Britain to start with that I've noticed now that it's happening in New York is that there was artwork in the tube stations. There were poems on the on the tube cars. I absolutely loved that. I just completely adored it. Um, so I would love to look around at all the beautiful artwork that was everywhere. Um, so there were also women artists that were getting recognition in the 80s. Um, we see Portuguese-born Paula Rego. Um, we see Mona Hatoum. She was born in Lebanon but lived in Britain since 1975. Um, so she's experimented with performance art, video installations. There's Sonia Boyce, who is an Afro Caribbean artist, um, who she's very well known. I love the titles. Lay back, keep quiet, think what made England great. It's 4 panels, which features a black female is presented as an English rose. Then it's kind of neat to see. As I said, I will do a PowerPoint for you. I wanted to. I would have, if I'd been at my office, which I can't be this week. Our building is closed for maintenance. I would have done it. I would have been able to show you that while I'm talking. So we see a lot of younger artists emerging as well. They were starting to show work that use materials, that use processes like they've never been seen before. They started exhibiting in empty warehouses instead of looking for gallery owners. So that kind of began in 1988 with Damien Hirst's Frieze being in a London Docklands warehouse. So there was the introduction of the Turner Prize in 1984 to kind of raise the profile for new artists. So some of the young British artists who had kind of appeared before, we see they're kind of they do an exhibit called Sensation at the Royal Academy. They were seen by over 3,000 members of the public, and we see the term Brit art as being introduced within the popular lexicon. Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, Gillian Waring, Jake and Dinos Chapman, Gavin Turk, Gary Hume, Fiona Ray, Mark Wallinger, Helen Chadwick, Eileen Cooper, Amanda Faulkner, Gwen Hardy, Christine Borland, and Sarah Lewis. So they had a lot of them had very controversial, shocking artworks. We see there was one of the shocking works was a 4 kind of a 4 meter high portrait. Meters are like yards. I'm sure you guys know meters though. He created Marcus Harvey had a portrait of a child murderer created with child's handprints. It was attacked with ink, and some people tried to protest that. Some people liked it though, so so a lot of the artwork, one of the newer museums that had emerged in the 80s, the Saatchi Museum, from Charles and Maurice Saatchi, who were Iraqi, but they grew up in Britain. where they had created an advertising agency. Um, they they wanted to raise awareness for British art. Um, so um, a lot of people think though that the Sachis um, that they're too influential in the art world. That they would pump and dump um, artists, which did not make some people very happy with them. So the trends that came across that continue to evolve um, were a lot of unusual examples. Um, my phone keeps ringing. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was this popular. Um, so, um, one of the more a lot of people were willing to pay very high prices for art. Um, the There was one in 2003, Michael Landy's Breakdown. Um, it involved the public destruction of 27 of 7,227 of the artist's personal possessions. Um, and we see other works that received widespread publicity. Sam Taylor Wood's video of the sleeping David Beckham. Mark Quinn's Self. And he froze 9 pints of his own blood into a cast of his head. Ew. And then another very controversial artist, Grayson Perry, who was transvestite, just attracted attention for very elaborate ceramics and tapestries, which would display sexually explicit imagery. He managed to get the CBE, Commander of the British Empire, for services to contemporary art. Okay, so the sculpture as well also would manage to attract attention, like the Angel of the North, and another place on Crosby Beach near Liverpool. A lot of public art has drawn attention as well. So some people know Banksy, the British artist, and I don't think we ever found out who Banksy was, but it definitely drew attention. We see a lot of the different we mentioned in our textbook mentions Banksy. I'll put some artwork by Banksy on our PowerPoint. So a lot of people did not like this kind of art, but that's kind of how art stays in England. So I'm debating whether I should carry on. I'm got about 18 or so pages left in the chapter, and I think I will try to get these videos up, and then I will, if time allows, time should allow, I will make time allow. I will come back to the second. I'll start off with the architecture and design lecture for this. So I'll see you guys in the final video of the day. Take care, y'all.